Docker is a sponsor of our ebook series on the Docker and container ecosystem. Learn more about Docker's perspectives in our latest ebook about monitoring and management. It's available for download now at thenewstack.io. Hi, this is Benjamin Ball with the New Stack. Today we're talking to John Willis, Director of Ecosystem Development at Docker. Great to see you, John.
Hey, Ben. Yeah, fun to be here.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. We're recording this podcast for our fifth and final ebook in the Docker and Container Ecosystem series. Sort of an appropriate finale, I think, in a lot of ways. We've kind of seen as this book series has progressed, moving more and more into actual containerized environments and sort of the challenges that people are facing. And monitoring is sort of in a lot of ways one of the sort of final steps, I guess. So it's kind of interesting to get Docker's perspective on it, get your perspective on it. I'm really curious to see what you have to say. Basically, the kind of first question I have been asking when we talk about this, which is important, I think, because so much that we think we know about monitoring, I think, changes with containers. But as essentially that question is, what about monitoring changes when you introduce containers?
Yeah, no, I think there's two answers here, right? Because one is, although not absolutely required with Docker and containers, but optimum is the changing landscape of architectures, right? So then fundamentally then the question says that if Docker is part of this convergence of a new architectural structure for how people deliver applications and infrastructure, then the answer is like everything changes, right? Like so, although not mandatory, people ask, do you have to do Docker if you have microservices? The answer is no, right? But do they both converge perfectly at the right time? Yes. And so when you start thinking about new greenfield architectures that people are building that we're using kind of decoupled microservice architectures, shorter time to live for instances. There's a varying data on how we're seeing kind of in some cases very short time to live for instances, more aggregate computing, if you will, and then just the order of magnitude of instances. So you think about decoupled, lots of them, and they're all flickering like stars in the sky, right? That changes the landscape really on almost everything we do for an enterprise systems management perspective. How do we monitor? How do we log? How do we even visualize these things that are going to be? I often think about the project that Netflix created to show the traffic between the three data centers, right? So there's that answer, and that's a hard problem. I think all the kind of vendors in the enterprise system management space are trying to get their head around that world. And we can talk a little bit more of that a little later. But then there's okay, John, can you really just stop bullshitting and give me the real answer? Which is there are some things about containers in terms of perimeters, right? Like particularly with Docker, but most container implementations I think will reasonably work the same. But of course, this is going to be mostly about Docker because I like Docker and I work there. But you think about the perimeters, right? So you have the host. Right, is typically either a VM or a physical machine, and then you have, so that's one perimeter, and that's the traditional perimeter of monitoring and enterprise system management, right? Like we look at the host and all the tools and everything we've done for the last 10, 15, 20 years, depending on your flavor of monitoring, is going to be basically the same, right? But then you have this kind of what I would call, in my terms, this inner perimeter problem or opportunity, which is the container itself. Particularly with Docker, Docker uses extensive use of namespaces. So there's isolation on the process ID tree. There's isolation on the file system, user ID. Basically, it's its own kind of virtual container And so this is where it gets a little tricky. A lot of the kind of newer age vendors deal with this well, but you have to recognize what's the difference between kind of the host, what I would call the outer perimeter, and the container itself, the inner perimeter. And then recognize, like, for example, what's the CPU utilization of a container instance, and what's its aggregate for the host, right? So you get into kind of interesting things there. And then again, if you look at the host level, right, it's easy to understand a process table, and monitor processes in a process table. It's easier to monitor a file system in a file system. And then, CPU, memory, all that good stuff. But now you get this inner perimeter problem where it's a completely different process tree. The PID of the container from the host, right, might have like process ID 3042 or whatever. But then that represents the outer perimeter's view of that process, which is just one process on the host, as opposed to getting inside the container and see what PID 1 is. And if you have a multiple process ID, if you have multiple kind of process architecture within the container, typically not a great idea, but whatever floats your boat in terms of how you container. Again, I think my meta point is that you have to understand that difference, and you have to use a vendor or use some tools that can separate that. And I think, the third thing is, okay, so you get the outer perimeter host, inner perimeter container. I think one of the challenges is understanding the correlation between the two, right? The outer perimeter host, has a host name. The inner perimeter container has a host name, right? What's the host name? What's the relationship? You know what I mean? And not getting your kind of time series database mixed up because of, which is the host and the type, So it's there are vendors that are solving this problem. Some doing it really good. Some of them almost, there's the green, which are the ones that are doing it really good. The ones that are totally ignoring the difference between, these kind of three things that you have to deal with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It sounds like there's basically a lot more objects and needing to communicate different context or types of information. You mentioned differentiating between the host and various other things. I wonder if that's about the kind of metadata that's involved in monitoring there, if it's actually relying on, say, a host to convey its role better than maybe it has in the past. But
that's a really good point, Ben, because there's one thing I think I would have probably failed to mention had you brought that up, right? Because again, I'm not a day-to-day monitoring guy, right? I'm this DevOps spokesman who tries to cover as much horizontal area of our industry as I can, right? But what I see are the patterns, and one of the things I think that people are having to take more responsibility with these kind of architectures, particularly with Docker, is injecting more metadata. Right. And so you see this kind of really well, for example, Docker has kind of a nice tagging, and you can set, kind of environment, all sorts of things. But even people, tagging, even right from the source repository, like in Git, right. And being able to have your monitoring tool take advantage of that in a real-time world. Right. So these kind of tags and these environment variables and, labels, if you will. Labels is another big piece of Docker's implementation. And using those very creatively, especially when you talk about scale and more ephemeral-like infrastructures. So I think that it becomes more of, again, an architectural challenge of rethinking. You build a VM, like you say, host name, and you'll probably recognize the IP. Maybe some aggregate host naming convention so that it's reasonably unique, something, so that it gets unique in your time series database, right? Well, that stuff gets really hard when you've got maybe 50, 100, 200 containers on one host, right? So you got to rely more on a lot more thought process in how you architect the metadata, even from the source.
Yeah, that was sort of, you're getting at one of the questions I was going to ask next, which is basically if container monitoring is really all that different from monitoring any other kind of distributed system. And I know that's sort of a loaded question because you're probably not just going to be monitoring containers. You're probably also going to be monitoring VMs still. Like it's, I don't know how many people are just doing the containers, but it's something I wanted to ask you. You already mentioned the kind of change in that architecture.
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes back to two things, right? Again, there is just fundamental shifts in how we think about these new type of architectures, decoupled microservices, lots of them, more ephemeral, right? That's a challenge in general. But to circle back on just traditional monitoring, in a sense, nothing changes, but it's all a matter of kind of perspective again. Like, I mean, we're still looking for things. We're still trying to tie back to some business policy, right? The good monitors don't just look at CPU, memory, and I/O and network I/O, right? The good monitors kind of tie that back into kind of general business policy, right? But at the end of the day, they're trying to pick up these kind of things and look for anomalies or give you some sense of trending. So, you know, like it's still computers, right? There's still like bits and bytes and memory and all that good stuff. But again, the perspective becomes what we talked about in the last question, which is, I think it's recognizing what CPU is on a container instance and how does it relate to an aggregate set of data that then populates into some business metrics, as opposed to a host versus a container, right? I mean, I think the devil is in the details of getting, understanding your isolation and boundaries between, you know, hosts, physical hosts, VMs, and then container instances. After that, it's basically traditional, except for the fact that once you're in the container, it's a little trickier to basically recognize a bunch of those metrics unique to the container.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we've sort of been talking about this already, but is the data that you're collecting from a container fundamentally different than, say, data you would collect from a VM?
Yeah, here again, like I'm going to be the most wishy-washy guest you ever had. Right? Like yes and no, right? Like, you know, again, I think, like I said earlier, like the yes part is, or the no part is the fundamental things that we look for are the same, right? Like we look for, you know, like memory, CPU, again, and for anybody who's listening, you know, I'm a firm believer of like getting that all tied up to business policy and business value, right? But like that's not this discussion. We're just focusing really on the kind of core aspects of monitoring here. But the kind of no is that like it's still CPU, memory, packets in, packets out, all those things. Again, the trick here is to be able to isolate that stuff to a container. And most traditional monitoring tools are not really equipped to get to that level in isolation. And, you know, one that comes to mind is, you know, early on in the container story, there's a company called Sysdig. They've done very well. The debate for Sysdig was, you know, part of the install, you have to kind of modify a Linux header. And early on, there was some pushback, like, but once you do that, once you install Sysdig and follow their installation process, you get to see all this beautiful isolated data from the container the container perspective or, you know, construct, right? But the debate was, do people want to modify Linux header? And I think the industry has reacted and said, you know what, I'd rather have the data. So Sysdig has done very well, and that question has been normalized. But you have to do something overt with your monitoring to be able to capture that kind of isolated container version or view of those metrics. Again, if you think about, if I look at a system and I'm running a container, if I'm looking at the host view, it just shows up the process ID. Now I can say what CPU that process is doing or memory is doing, but what I really want to see is what's inside running in the container. Is there a process tree in there? Is there a set of processes running in the container? What CPU are they using? And really kind of look at it that perspective. That's kind of tricky. I think a few vendors do it well. Sysdig does it kind of very well.
Good. They're definitely irrelevant to this space. Is another question I have is sort of mixing some of what we've already talked about here, but we've sort of talked about maybe then how we apply lessons from monitoring. We apply the same kind of practices that are going into monitoring an application or systems, and it's sort of applied to containers. Is that sufficiently the same as applying those lessons to, say, microservices or even like a multi-tenant environment? Is basically those concepts going to translate between these different usages?
Yeah, and I think that's an answer where I can give a clear, I think no, right? I think when you start adopting these kind of microservices, very scalable compute infrastructure using containers, possibly some of the types of compute that you do are short-lived. This Dave McCrory has this concept of data gravity, which I've loved, which, I always say the kind of guns, germs, and steel of the new world is really kind of data gravity, and containers and microservices, right? And so in that world, there's a lot of compute workloads where you just literally, and data gravity for those people here, it's kind of an idea that you move compute to the data. Traditionally we always move data to compute, right? But this kind of concept that where data kind of aggregates in a locale. And then so you start thinking about, like, should I swarm a bunch of compute? Apologize for the overload usage of terms, because we do have something called Docker Swarm, but swarm the compute over at this kind of aggregate data, this data gravity, and then swarm some compute over here. So you start thinking about compute instances that might live very short and run lots of them, right? So you have this, there are workloads that can be very ephemeral and locale specific. How do you monitor that in a traditional sense? I think the answer is you don't. Like, if you're going to be running workloads where a container might run less than a minute, what is going to be your cycle time for monitoring? Well, first off, let's one thing. There's probably people screaming out there who are monitoring savvy or saying, let's get one thing first. You're not going to run monitoring agents on containers. It's just not going to be a good idea. You're going to have to do something like Sysdig does, or ones that kind of lay down syscalls and monitor, basically, or monitor it from the kind of network data plane, like an SDN model. But so there again, that alone changes everything, because you're not going to probably run large clusters, even if they're long-lived, of containers with monitoring agents on every one. So now you've broken almost half of what everybody on the planet does from a data center monitoring infrastructure. All the agent-based ones have to rethink. But then again, if you have short-lived, even like polling becomes, monitors that kind of reach in and, like a Nagios or something like that, right? Like that even kind of changes, because again, if something's going to live for a minute, like how many chances do you get to see what it is, and does that even matter? So you kind of raise the bar on looking at things as aggregate clusters or aggregate service clusters, and start thinking about grades of, shades of, yellow, green, red, in terms of the aggregate of the structure, and I think, again, you get into, if there are 100 of them, if, 5 fail, it's just a little tint less than green. If 15 fail at any given time, or failing at a given time, you may be getting the yellow. And then also, we need to look for a trend. I'll give you another example. You should have got me on a show. You knew I was going to shut up if you got me talking, right? I saw a presentation about 6 months ago from some of the network guys at Facebook. And so from a network monitoring perspective, Facebook, and I actually confirmed this last week when I met Pedro Kahani, who runs the SRE group over there. Not that it needed to be confirmed, but I mean, really, there's only one metric they actually really pay attention to on a network monitoring. Right? Imagine this: you get Facebook, you get gazillions of infrastructure going on, and you only care about one metric, and that's packet loss. Right? And they have layers of telemetry, and and they do, they're able to kind of correlate different, like whether it's local data center or, and they can do this like amazing telemetry just by triangulating packet loss in the whole infrastructure. It's one metric, right? So again, I think it's scale and where containers take us. you fundamentally have to change the way you think about traditional monitoring. I mean, you imagine a monitoring vendor that comes in, I do network monitoring. Here's the gazillion metrics that we give you. And Facebook's like, yeah, you know what? We're okay. We only monitor one. And we can build all of our telemetry, diagnostics, and troubleshooting and predictive analysis all around that metric, right? So predictive analysis has a lot to do with it. So again, it's less of a discussion about like what happens with Docker and more of a discussion about, about the kind of bigger picture. The other thing, would be kind of worth adding here is, that you start thinking about like what Netflix does with like fault injection. Like you better tap the traditional monitoring folk on the shoulder, right? Hey, by the way, we're going to be like blowing out, methods and instances and compute instances on a regular basis randomly, because we're building this kind of incredible feedback loop, right? Where does traditional monitoring play in that architecture where you're purposely blowing up your own infrastructure, chaos monkey, all that stuff, right? So these are hard problems that our industry is going to have to address. And Docker's a big part of it, and how we Docker work with vendors and help people understand at least the basic fundamentals of what you should know about a container versus a host and those kind of things.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that you bring up the Facebook example because it's sort of illustrates, I think, one thing I discovered kind of early on, which is just how opinionated the different approaches are to monitoring. And you sort of mentioned this earlier, but it seems very aligned to ultimately business value is why are we monitoring what we're monitoring? Are we looking to gather a ton of information and store that data, and are we actually going to use it and debug? But if you're not going to, if there's really one metric that matters the most or one aspect of the health of your infrastructure that matters the most, then the business value kind of points to that. And so that's interesting to me. I wonder, do you agree with that, I guess?
I do. I remember probably years ago when I worked for Chef, I would go to Seattle quite often, and a lot of the original founders of Chef were ex-Amazon employees. So periodically we'd get to go over to Amazon and see these kind of impromptu sessions that you either had to know somebody. They were public, but like you wouldn't really know. And I happened to catch Werner Wargels, the CTO of Amazon, and one of the things, and it was like the history of Amazon's infrastructure, right? It was I don't think it was taped, it was unfortunately, but like he went through like how they kind of reinvented themselves from basically just web-based to SOA to web scale to, each time. And then near the end, somebody asked about like, what do you monitor? And he said, I'm completely paraphrasing, on warped, decaying memory of the thing. But I remember him saying like, we monitor everything, but we only care about one thing, and it's order rate. And they had, they were, Jeff Bezos, for all indications, was a very lean guy, into lean. I suspect he understood statistical process control because they basically described what would be basically called a control chart, which is this kind of upper control limit, lower control limit, something core to statistical process control and Deming, but I dare not go there. But the point is, like, that's kind of years of heuristics and statistical process control to tell. And he said, if order rate is within, basically upper and lower control limits, and what makes up what that means is years of data, or the day, or is there a world tournament going on, right? All that stuff gets factored in, and what he, in his words, my paraphrasing of his words, all he cared about was, or what Amazon cared about was that number statistically above the upper control limit or below the lower control limit. Otherwise, disk space, CPU, memory, right? Those are all just vanity metrics. Again, he didn't say vanity metrics. But yeah, no, so long-winded answer, your question is absolutely right. I think Netflix has figured this, Facebook has figured this out by packet loss from a networking perspective. And I think that, like, if you can get to that magical thing that like describes your business in one metric, God bless you.
Yeah, to me that's interesting, and it kind of justifies, I think, why there is different perspectives on how to monitor. It's not necessarily very straightforward, I guess. In the end, there is kind of a lot of different ways to approach it. And speaking of there being a lot of ways to approach it, basically maybe could we talk a little bit about what Docker's perspective is on monitoring? How does Docker think you should actually go about monitoring containers?
Yeah, so we work. I work in the business development group, and I work with something that we've matured. I've been at Docker getting close to 2 years. For the last little over a year, I've been very involved in something called the Ecosystem Technology Partnership Program, and I have a team of guys that we work with partners. They come in, they join up as a member. We have like different categories, whether you're config management, whether you're monitoring, logging, whatever. And really what we do, monitoring, is very similar to everybody else. You either come in and you're completely green and you don't really understand how to do anything with Docker, but you want to be a partner with us because you have big customers that we have. And so in that case, we literally Sherpa you through the whole process. We kind of give you a quick education on, what are the monitoring APIs that we provide, what are the do's and don'ts. The other extreme is somebody comes in fully loaded and like understands monitoring and Docker as well as we do, maybe more. And then it's just kind of going down the list. Did you do anything did you modify Docker? Are you using our APIs? If you're not using APIs, you have a really good argument or a story of why you're not using. We have some really robust, we have the stats API. So we really try to get partners to kind of, so I think, really me just being the kind of figurehead really, but my team, that has just done an amazing job of really working with hundreds of companies over the last year and a half. And externally people see this as well. Like, look at all the people working with Docker. Look at all these products that work well with Docker. I got 3 guys that are basically 4, including Brent Salisbury, the network guy, but that have just spent an incredible amount of time with all these partners, making sure either they thought they knew everything right and we checkbox and said, yep, you were right, or they thought they had everything right, checkbox, no, you probably need to use the stats API for this because we provide that. You should use this because then, it's cleaner and a migration path with us. So we've to Docker's credit, we've invested a fair amount, a lot. Again, a team of like 5 people that for a startup. We spend all of our time working with some of the largest name vendors that provide monitoring and logging out there. Just constantly working with them, and people look at Docker and they say, well, Docker, how do they work with their partners? What a lot of people don't see is the freedom that Solomon Ben gives me and my team to work with all these partners and spend all this time on really non-revenue generating stuff, right? But it helps the industry, it helps the Docker ecosystem. So anyway, you never get a short answer with me, but we spend a lot of time helping. And then again, that informs the industry because if you look, it's just to brief my memory, because I cover a lot of different areas. I don't just focus on monitoring all day long. So I wanted to go back and make sure I was kind of sharp for this podcast. But, on any topic, all these vendors that we've worked with, these partners, they all have blog articles. And like if you want to learn how to do the stats API, just Google stats API and there'll be 3 or 4 very well-known, recognized monitoring vendors that will have, really good explanations as you as a customer, if you don't want to use their product, how you could use the stats API, right? They didn't get all of that from us, but again, my team spent a lot of time educating a lot of different companies.
Yeah, we've, I guess, talked a lot about the ETP program essentially here because so much of what we do is looking at the ecosystem level around Docker and containers, and so much of that kind of originates from these companies that are building off of Docker or building integrations with Docker, and so it makes a lot of sense that you would point to a lot of these vendors that are doing great things. I sort of want to ask more explicitly maybe about what Docker's commercial offerings, how they approach monitoring, if monitoring is a core feature, I guess, of any of those products.
It's, it is, again, here we're back to a yes and no answer, right? Like, I mean, we're not like going out and gonna, compete with Datadog or, Signal FX or New Relic or AppDynamics, all those companies, right? Like, that's not what we do. Is there, we talk about our thing, which is, kind of our holistic full stack. These are my terms. I'll probably get yelled at by the marketing folk, but, holistic full stack offering of Docker, which includes, we call it the Docker data center. It includes, commercial version of the Docker engine. It includes a commercial version of kind of our orchestration layer, which is now actually built in to the engine itself. And then we have something called the universal control plane. Like, we have the Docker trusted registry. So the point is, we will sell you a fully comprehensive, everything you need to run Docker data center in the enterprise at scale. And, we have got a lot of glue in there. And there's some flavors of monitoring and orchestration, right? Not completely. But I still think at the end of the day, you want to use Docker data center, and then you want to find, the right vendor for you to do the really kind of end-to-end monitoring, not only to look at Docker, but like not everything's going to be running Docker. So you need a holistic monitoring vendor who focuses on vendoring. So although there'll be points of like even now little overlaps, there might be some more overlaps in the future of what we do to make sure the Docker data center or the holistic experience of Docker is what, we our core DNA at Docker, if people haven't recognized, is trying to make the user experience as useful and quick and easy to use and to get the most value out of it as fast as possible, right? So whatever we have to do to get that done, you're going to see, but we're not going to be in the core business of just monitoring Docker containers.
Great, and that does seem to line up pretty well with, I think, Docker's approach to a couple different areas, I guess. So that makes sense to me. I did want to mention there was, we covered this a bit, the relatively recently released InfraKit sort of seems to have some potential impact on monitoring. So it's something I wanted to bring up and see if you had any words about InfraKit.
Yeah, I think, one of the things, I know I'm going to sound like a Docker fanboy here, but like,
you should.
No, well, people who know me, I'll be as critical about Docker as the next guy, right? I'll take my Docker hat off faster than anybody. But one of the things, again, the things I do get excited about what we do, if you look at kind of where InfraKit was born out of, what we do is, as we build things, and I really, I kind of give credit to our engineering departments because, of course we're going to build commercial products. Hey, sorry folks, we're going to build commercial products if like you didn't figure that out, right? But what we're doing is we're still being good stewards, because I see this trend, like even the Docker for the Mac, like a lot of that technology that was born, and it's free, by the way, Docker for Mac, right? Like load it up, run it on your Mac, right? It's an awesome experience. It totally beats out, running, the toolkit or even Vagrant. And trust me, I'm a big fan of Vagrant, but I don't use it anymore because of the Docker for Mac. But like we turn those into a bunch of open source projects. So what we learned in building that, we like as we were building, it was like, well, let's make this available to everybody. Like, so you have a hypervisor for the Mac, right? That's available. We support it. It's open source. We got kind of a VPN like integration. And then the same thing happened with kind of InfraKit, as we were developing, Docker for AWS, which is a kind of full, if you're going to go AWS and you want the kind of full Docker experience, from a Docker perspective, not from a kind of AWS or EC2 perspective, right? Like we built that, and we have the same thing with Azure. It's a kind of Docker for Azure, right? And these are two where like it's the full Docker experience. And by the way, if it's AWS, we integrate with ELB, and we tie all the knots of all those kind of APIs that you're going to have to deal with. While we were building it, our engineers, like there were some commonalities, right? And so that basically turned into an open source project called InfraKit. And so, yeah, InfraKit covers kind of the soup to nuts framework structure for commonalities to building a structure on top of, in this case, some type of platform like that, although it could be really any platform. And there's a fair amount of monitoring in there built into the structure itself, right? So, there is a lot of, because there it's a lot about like kind of, if you're going to scale out containers or scale out whatever the definition of the instance, it's very open-ended. Then there's health checks and there's healing and there's all those things that we wind up having to do. So in there, a lot of what you think about remediation from a monitoring perspective in terms of actionable remediation, we do cover a lot of that in InfraKit. So you could, if you were developing kind of your own Docker or containerized infrastructure, you could use the InfraKit to set some base kind of object differentiation, and then have this assurance that a lot of the kind of heartbeat, health checking, infrastructure monitoring from a remediation standpoint is handled.
Great. That's interesting, and I think we're kind of expect to see more, I think, from InfraKit, at least as far as what other people are going to do with it. So it's been great talking, John. I wanted to maybe give you a chance if there was anything else you thought interesting to point out to our listeners. I'm not sure if there's anything you think we didn't hit on, but
well, I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground. I think I was pretty long-winded on a lot of answers. I will try to take this little exit to do a shameless plug for my a book that it's been out for about 3 weeks now, the DevOps Handbook. Me, Gene Kim, Patrick Depar, and Jez Humble. It's 5 years of our kind of combined knowledge about DevOps. The DevOps Handbook. I was able to shim in within the last 4 months of finishing the book some really good Docker and immutable infrastructure stories in terms of the delivery pipeline. So anyway, check it out, the DevOps Handbook.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Actually, I was reading about that earlier before we talked. And I'm certainly really interested in picking that up, actually. Certainly a lot of people with good thoughts in this space. So I could see that being very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John. I'm glad you could talk to us. I think we've covered a lot, as you said. You're certainly not as long-winded as you.
Thank you.
If anything, I prefer long-winded. So thanks again. Thanks for listening to the New Stack. We'll see you again soon. Docker is a sponsor of our ebook series on the Docker and container ecosystem. Learn more about Docker's perspectives in our latest ebook about monitoring and management. It's available for download now at thenewstack.io.